Vicki and Diane, and soon-to-be new member Kashi. Welcome. We've had it. Those were the words of Bobby Francois on October 12, 1972. Bobby felt that he and his friends, his fellow plane survivors, were doomed. They had crashed very high in the Andes with 45 souls on board. 32 people survived the initial impact. They were facing cold weather, very deep snow. They were surrounded by 14,000-foot peaks. They had very little food, little warm clothing, limited shelter, and they had gravely injured people among them. They did not know where they were, and they had no ability to communicate to the outside world, to send messages to the outside world. We've had it. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 was the SS Minnow under much worse conditions. Ginger was not slinking about in her evening gown. It was to be no 3-hour tour. It was the SS Minnow under terrible conditions. The passengers were the Old Christians rugby team. They were on a 5-day trip from Montevideo, Uruguay, flying across South America to Santiago, Chile. They were in a U.S. manufactured Fairchild airplane, and it hit a saddle in the mountains. A saddle would be if you have a peak, and then you have an area going like this, and you have another peak. The plane managed to come and hit the saddle. And as it did so, it continued onward, minus its tail, minus its wings. It became a 230-mile-an-hour toboggan. Robert Canessa, one of the passengers on board, braced himself, thinking, it'll be over at any moment. That did not happen. Against the odds, the plane slid to a rest at 11,500 feet high in the Andes. There were groans, prayers, and calls for help. We've had it. It was a time of hunger, a time of cold, a time of desperation, a time of death. It was also a time of courage, a time of innovation, a time of determination. 2 doctors on board came to the aid of the injured. The only problem was they weren't doctors. One was in year 1 of 8 years of medical study. The other was in year 2 of 8 years of medical study. But under the circumstances, they were the doctors. Up in the cockpit, co-pilot Dante LaGuarara was gravely injured. 2 of the people on board made the way out of the plane, out of the side door, and managed to get up to the cockpit in through the very deep snow, and looked down at Lieutenant LaGuarara, where he was saying, "We passed Curico. We passed Curico. Get my gun." But the Old Christians were Catholic, and according to the book Alive, they did not assist him in his suicide. They did not go and get a gun. He wanted to kill himself. He was gravely injured. And as for passing Curico, which was an important point on the navigation of the plane, they had not done that. There was severe pilot error. Instead of passing Curico, they had turned at the wrong point, turned right into the heart of the Andes Mountains. Now you might say that's been a long time ago. 1972, that was 41 years ago. Something like that would not happen today. There is not severe human error today in navigating a plane. Well, I would say look over to the Italian coast right now and look at what's going on over there with that big cruise ship that the crews are trying to raise up again. People will do dumb things. It happens. It will happen in the future. It'll never go away. In Santiago, the Service of Air Rescue kicked into motion. They had limited resources because of problems going on with the government in Chile at the time, but they were obliged to search for 10 days per international protocol. They knew that there were low odds of anyone surviving a plane crash in the high Andes. Plus, if you were to do an efficient search, it would be a search at low altitude and low speed, which in the turbulent Andes may very well result in another plane crash. So they did the best that they could. The food supply that the 32 survivors had on board was very, very limited. They had 12 chocolate bars, they had some dates and prunes, they had a can of almonds, they had 5 bottles of alcohol, and they had lots and lots of cigarettes. Because the people in Uruguay knew that there was a good black market for cigarettes in Chile, so everybody loaded up with cigarettes. So they had plenty of smokes, but when it came to food, almost nothing. We've had it. There was an endless discussion of food among the survivors. If White Castle had existed in Chile at the time, they probably would have mentioned, oh, you go to White Castle and you get the little sliders and they have the little buns and it comes with a nice little square of meat in it with a couple of little holes and there's cheese on it and it's a nice yellowish color. They just talked forever about food because they were slowly starving to death. On day 10, Nando Parado, who seems like he was really a bold man, declared the following: we cannot climb mountains. We cannot climb mountains on a square of chocolate and a sip of wine. I will cut meat from the pilot. Beef was not what was for dinner. It was not prime rib. It was not a cheap cut of pot roast. It was not the sort of creamy colored ground beef that you sometimes see that has a lot of fat in it. No, beef was not what was for dinner. On day 11, an announcement came from the Service of Air Rescue, and the survivors had the ability to get messages because they had transistor radios with them. And the message from the Service of Air Rescue that was broadcast over the radio said the following: the Service of Air Rescue has requested all commercial and military aircraft overflying the Cordillera to check for any sign of the wreckage of the Fairchild 571. This follows the cancellation of the search by the SAR for the Uruguayan aircraft because of negative results. Can you imagine getting that news? You're up, you're slowly starving to death, you're freezing to death, and you get the news that the search is officially off. You're out of luck. The days continued to click by. Day 17, another very, very bad day. If you look at it very morbidly, there were positive aspects to it too, from a very morbid standpoint. Avalanche comes down the mountain. All the people are inside the plane at the time. They're getting ready to go to bed. Covers the plane with snow. At that point, the number of people on board, of the 45 souls originally alive, it was down to 19 after the avalanche came down the mountain. But looking at it from a morbid standpoint, there were 2 positive aspects. One, the snow covered the airplane, reducing the risk of freezing to death. And because there were more dead people, it also increased the food supply. Bad, bad, bad conditions. Don't complain about your next airplane flight. During World War II, Winston Churchill said the following: we shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and on the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. That was the attitude that was needed, and there were some people on the plane that had it. It didn't depend on whether you were the biggest person physically or not. Some people had the spirit to really push, and others didn't for survival. Among the survivors, they had little expeditions out to try and figure out where they were. They found the tail section of the airplane, found a few more supplies. They also tried to figure out what the lay of the land was. It was a time to look to the optimistic and the strong. We've had it. That was not to be the case. To be continued.